Sorry about that, babe.
After a long delay, we finally got around to Shadow Tower. It's been in many polls but hasn't emerged victorious until recently. And I will admit, I'd been itching for that old school FromSoft style, and could you guess it? Shadow Tower scratched that itch and then some. Shadow Tower is a first-person action RPG in the same vein as Kingsfield. Developed by FromSoftware and published by Agetec in North America, released on the Sony PlayStation in North America on November 23rd of 1999. Oddly enough, I concluded my first ever playthrough on the 26th anniversary of its North American release. I didn't realize that until writing my script just now, so interesting stuff. The story. Shadow Tower takes place in the continent of Eclipse, which is divided up into a few different kingdoms, and is located in the Holy Land of Zepter. I've also seen Zepter spelled out as Zepta with an A and Zeptar, A-R at the end. Anyway, there's a mysterious and powerful single-eyed crown which sadly destroyed said kingdom of Eclipse, turning it into a huge hole in the ground. This is where you take over as a mercenary named Ruse Hardy. The manual alludes to a growing amount of mercenaries in the area, so it's inferred that there are wars abound. Ruse is traveling the Holy Lands of Zepter and is trying to visit an old woman, who served as a pseudo-grandmother to Ruse, who's an orphan. When reaching the village where the old woman resided, sadly it was reduced to a pile of rubble and ash. A man then greets Ruse, mistaking him for Vidine, Earl of Marves? Yeah, to my knowledge you get no backstory on who that is. Maybe I'm wrong. Somebody, if you want to enlighten me, feel free. Anyways, now here is where Demon Souls is basically born. You are tasked to save the villagers who have had their souls sucked out of their bodies, and you do so by slaying the demons within and finding the aforementioned one-eyed crown. Dude gives Ruse a magic sword, which is the demon's only weakness, and yeah, get in that tower, or more aptly a reverse tower that's in a hole, and slay some demons. In classic FromSoftware fashion, the in-game lore is sparse. You will meet a few NPCs along the way, as well as read some writings on the wall which contain traces of dialogue, lore, and tone setting, and from there, you can take charge and figure things out for yourself. At the very least, it's an interesting premise to get you going. Graphics. These are the types of graphics that are peak PS1 era for me. At times blocky, 3D polygons, seemingly stitched together floor and wall creases for repeating patterns, but dang does it scratch that nostalgic itch. If you're familiar with the Kingsfield series, things will surely look and feel similarly in Shadow Tower. My main two callouts for Shadow Tower are the atmospheric lighting changes that can occur, which help paint a variety of moods. There's the standard unlit, dark, shrouded progression. You could light a torch to see a little bit better while creating a warm and adventurous feel. Or you could pop a bottle of light and make it seem like someone turned on the overhead lights. The lighting plays a huge aspect in both the mood and graphics of Shadow Tower. My other callout is the wide variety of enemies and NPCs present in Shadow Tower. 150 different enemy types in total. I absolutely love the designs, from the most basic of basic to the most advanced, and all the weirdness in between. I don't want to get too far off because I want to cover things in the gameplay and fun factors section a little bit more, but it's almost as if you took Kingsfield and blended it up with Silent Hill at times with some of these enemies. The graphics absolutely nail the feel and presumably the look that FromSoftware was going for. Sure, nowadays a lot of games in this era seem cruddy in terms of the graphics, but again, it bears repeating, to me, this is on the peak PS1 graphical style spectrum. Music and sound. Okay, so this is a funny one in a few ways. Yes, there are a few music tracks in Shadow Tower, but it's not really in the actual game. Mainly in the intro sequences, ending, credits, and there's some tracks in the versus mode which I'll cover briefly later on. Otherwise, as far as in-game music goes, nope. And what makes it funny is at first I was like, man, that's gotta stink, mostly because I was thinking with my Kingsfield brain. But after pondering on it a little bit more, I realized, damn, Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and so on, they don't really have in-game music either other than boss fights and hub areas. So maybe they were onto something here, and onto something they were indeed. This game needs no in-game music. In fact, I would argue that it would detract from the style and feel if it had it. The sound design of Shadow Tower is top-notch. The effects of walking, opening doors, combat, shooting spells, it gets the job done effectively, making it truly seem like one man against a legion of horrific demons in the depths of the world. But where it really excels are the ambient noises. Hearing enemies in the distance before seeing them brings about the terror of the unknown, and don't get me started about the noises, grumbles, and groans as well as the incomprehensible speaking that can occur in the background throughout the game, atmosphere and creep factor to the max. Shadow Tower, I'm sure, is set out to make you feel isolated, scared, and lost in a foreign area inhabited by unimaginable creatures. Graphically, it was a success, and the same could be said for the sound design. Controls. Alright, I can't sugarcoat it here, and I'm probably just repeating myself at this point between all my Kingsfield and Eternal Ring reviews, but the controls, menuing, combat, etc. are all basically the same from those titles. Classic old school FromSoft first-person maneuvering, which can be very off-putting to newcomers, and possibly still great on veterans of the respective series at times, though for me at this point it's pretty much second nature. While you will be constantly moving with the D-pad, you're also going to be using the shoulder buttons to not only strafe through tight spots and around enemies, but to help aim up and down, whether it be with your sword hitting a blob on the ground near the beginning of the game, or later on firing an arrow or a magic spell at something far above. I will admit the few times that you have to adjust verticality with attacking enemies, it can be cumbersome at best. In Shadow Tower, you could also have two different weapons and magic rings equipped at once. There are button combinations to press in order to enact the new weapon or shoot the separate spells. I'll share the graphic on the screen for you here from the manual. I also found this to be a bit cumbersome. You don't press the buttons at the same time, it's more like you press the first button and then the other one right after. Even towards the end of the game I still struggled with it occasionally, but some of that could likely be blamed on in-game slowdown. On the whole, the menuing felt fine and fluid just as it did in the other FromSoft titles from this era, and I don't really have much to say either way. Again, if you're a veteran of FromSoft titles of old, Shadow Tower's controls will feel right at home. If it's your first foray into their classic catalog, there will be a learning curve. Gameplay and fun factor. Shadow Tower's core gameplay revolves around traversing areas, slaying enemies, finding treasures, felling bosses of said areas, and heading into a final showdown. Shadow Tower is made up of 7 different worlds, and the 8th is dubbed Void. There's the human world, the earth world, the fire world, the water world, illusion world, beast world, and Death World. Now each world is divided up into segments ranging from 2 to 6. For example, the opening world, the human world, has 4 different regions, where the next world, the Earth world, is made up of 6. Throughout these worlds, all of which are very unique and have their own gimmicks, for example a classic FromSoft poison area, and a bit later the water area is made up of hurtful, degrading acid. Throughout said worlds, you'll encounter up to 150 different monster types, lending itself to excellent variety throughout. Said variety also extends into the amount of items, armor, weapons, rings, and equipment that's found throughout Shadow Tower, either by way of natural defined looting or chance enemy drops. I mentioned before that the enemy design in Shadow Tower reminded me of Kingsfield mixed together with Silent Hill, which is very fitting, because to me, Shadow Tower is basically if you took Kingsfield and turned it into a survival horror title. Between the aforementioned excellent sound design, lighting options, creepy and foreboding atmospheres, jump scares, and so forth, is the durability system, which makes an appearance, albeit at a lesser level in Kingsfield 4: The Ancient City. As you progress on your journey, your gear will become worn down. This feature is essentially Shadow Tower's version of, let's say, ammo conservation that would exist from an earlier Resident Evil title. The more hits you take, the more your armor wears down. The more magic you use, the quicker the rings fall apart. The more strikes you land on the enemy, the more dull your blade becomes. While your equipment can reach 0 durability, it's never really truly broken unless you want it to be. Sure, you can no longer use it before you repair it, but it's not gone thankfully, and yes, Shadow Tower does a good job natively of giving you tons of gear. So unless you're terrible at the game, it won't be too much of a headache. And quickly, I wanted to touch on the fact that Shadow Tower is very generous. Nearly every single time you're worried about something, the game seems to deliver and help you out. Running low on health? Well, just around the corner might be some HP potions. Is your durability running low and you can't get to a smithy? The game will conveniently give you Dorado's Ashes, which is an item that repairs equipped durability, so on and so forth. That was one of my favorite elements of Shadow Tower. They hang you out to dry at times, but there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I mentioned the smithy. The in-game currency and merchant model is very unique and strange, and dare I say, very Shadow Tower. Throughout your journey, you'll find a merchant who sells you items, keys, and equipment by the in-game currency known as coons. These can be found throughout as loot, and also drop from certain enemies. This is clearly a quote traditional merchant, where the remaining 3 have a Shadow Tower gimmick that I found to be kinda refreshing. The remaining merchants deal with HP potions, MP potions, and durability repair. The HP and MP potion merchants do not accept goons, rather you are forced to part ways with any form of armor, weapon, ring, etc. on your person, a 1-for-1 trade. I recommend giving them something that you never really plan on using. For me this was full plate armor or many of the shields, or perhaps something that already had very low durability and would just wear down quickly. And don't get me wrong, MP potions are great and all, but HP potions are where it's at because, aside from the fact that HP keeps you alive, HP is also used as a form of currency with the weapon durability smithies. That's right, you repair your gear with your health. I'd also be remiss if I did not touch quickly on the shields. Yes, you have shields in Shadow Tower. These could be equipped in your left hand and can absorb enemy blows, block enemy spells, and so forth. Personally, I didn't use them much in my run, mostly because I am, Kingsfield pilled, but I'll give them a little bit of a better go in future runs as I can see their uses. I guess this is also a good time to touch on the interesting leveling system in Shadow Tower. While it is true that the more enemies you kill, the more your stats go up and the stronger you get, you could also level up in Shadow Tower through the use of soul pod items. With them, you have the control to put your stats across a variety of categories. From my minimal experience, I'd say it's probably a good idea to dump 90+% of them into strength, which raises your HP because again, the more health you have, the harder it is to die, and the durability smithy is much needed. I think it's a very interesting blend of both leveling up organically and manually. Speaking of HP's importance, I want to touch on something that I completely ignored on my first run. The equip info, or more detailed screen for equipment. It serves as another way to equip and view equipment, but the two main allures to it are, 1, you could actually see the extra effects that are on said equipment. For example, during my run, I clearly had armor pieces that were healing me, but I was just assuming that based off of the name and what I was seeing on the screen. On the equip info screen, you could properly see the extra effects that they respectively bring to the table. Also, at the bottom is a quick menu screen, which I didn't use at all. This way you can quickly access up to 5 items by pressing circle, cycling through, and then selecting with X. Truthfully, this part isn't huge to me. I'm definitely more of a gaming boomer and prefer to go into the paused menu screen to select, but cool nonetheless. Lastly, some odds and ends before going into my critiques. This game is a 100%er's dream. There are many rare drops, 150 different enemies to encounter, which could be logged into your creature book. You could see your progress by pressing triangle on the creature book option on the menu screen. And then 120 of them apparently can be used in a 2-player versus mode. Now, I didn't really play this mode because I didn't have a second player, but essentially it's a fighting game within Shadow Tower where you could use the creatures that you've logged. You could wager bets in the form of in-game items or equipment, and this mode actually features some of the game's only music. It can be a pretty fun little deviation, as well as a way to acquire some rare drop items that perhaps you missed by way of the betting system. I could see it being pretty cool, but even if I had a player too, it's really not for me. And I'm sorry if you wanted more coverage here. If you do want more coverage, I suggest checking out some of the other videos that I'll link in the pinned comment description below from other content creators. Another cool aspect of Shadow Tower is if you miss things on your run, when the game is cleared you can make a save which sends you back to the beginning, allowing you to go through once again at your current stat and gear situation to tie up loose ends. And I wanted to finish off by stating that I enjoy how big the game feels. There are branching paths, differing areas, secrets, and so forth, but it's not too overwhelming. While there is no in-game map or mapping system, it's not terrible to traverse. In fact, it can be pretty easy to go back through most of the game by backtracking or some of the many in-game warps. There's even an item called the Sacred Feather which allows you to warp back to your last save point in case you're really up against it. Again, if you're a fan of the Kingsfield or Eternal Ring formula, you'll feel right at home with Shadow Tower. And me being a huge survival horror fan, loving the spooky and conservation aspect, this was right up my alley. But as much as I enjoyed Shadow Tower, I can admit that there are a few things that weren't the best or could grind someone else's gears. Critiques. I'll start off with the obvious. If you don't like the slow, plotting nature of the Kingsfield games, and I'm going to tell you right now, Shadow Tower is not going to magically make you a fan. Shadow Tower is definitely a, quote, for fans of, end quote, type of recommended experience. One of the biggest gimmicks in the game is equipment durability, and admittedly this can be very annoying. Even with Dorado's Ashes and HP consuming smithies. Very easy to get hit in many areas, degrading your armor quite fast. Also very easy to rip through your magic rings and certain low durability weaponry. On the whole, I like what it provided. It was a different tone and style compared to Kingsfield, but I wish they toned it down slightly. Maybe a 5 to 10% variation tweak in terms of less degradation could have gone a long way. And now I'm going to finish off with some smaller things that irk me just a bit. In areas that are ripe with enemies, you're going to encounter some insane slowdown, and it's really going to throw you for a loop at times during your combat. Also, if you're trying to 100% the game, it can be a chore. There are certain enemies that don't spawn very often, which could lead to a lot of back and forth wandering until said spawn pops. Also, there are a finite number of enemies in Shadow Tower, meaning when you kill the limit, they're gone forever. So, if you were looking for a certain rare drop from the enemy, make sure you have some prior knowledge and a backup save handy. There are also a ton of gotcha type moments in Shadow Tower where you immediately enter a room or an area and you get dive bombed by enemies without a chance to react. This can be very annoying, especially given the durability system that's in place. And of course, a tale as old as time in RPGs, but there are some tedious status afflictions that can grind your gears. For me, this was highlighted by paralysis, seemingly inflicted by enemies when they look at you. And of course, curse, which could last forever if you run out of divine symbol items. And lastly, I'll admit this is probably the most nitpicky thing that I have on the list. When you're over encumbered in Shadow Tower, you have a 1 HP drain over time on your character. I wish that it just made you slower and fatter, so to speak. I feel like that would have made for a more interesting challenge run than the HP drain, and just a better overall punishment, but what are you gonna do? In summation, Shadow Tower was a game that was on my backlog for a long time. I was so happy that it finally won our community poll, and it was a blast to play. Being a huge fan of both new and old FromSoftware, especially Kingsfield, Shadow Tower delivered a similar experience while being so totally different at the same time, carving out its own special place in my gaming heart. I can totally understand the people that don't like Shadow Tower. I'd wager that many of them also don't like Kingsfield, but there's something about this formula that speaks to me, and I can't get enough. I give Shadow Tower on the PS1A 8 out of 10. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to see more Shadow Tower content, check out the pinned comment, description, or end screen for my first ever playthrough of the game. And probably upcoming as of the time of this review, I'm still working on a Shadow Tower All Retro Achievements run. That'll be out at some point in the future as well. I'll make sure to update the Shadow Tower playlist accordingly. Take care.